In this video, we're going to look at a familiar passage in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, the account of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you've ever gone to church at all for any length of time, you've heard this account in Daniel chapter 3. You know, genuine faith, when it's tested, will grow stronger. It'll become more deeply rooted, and as a result, it will grow and give glory to God. And I think that's one of the purposes of this account that we have here in Daniel chapter 3 is to allow us to do some soul searching, some self-examination, and ask ourselves some questions. How strong is my faith? And how strong is my commitment to the Lord? And how strong is my stand for Him? This is a long chapter. It's 30 verses, and we're going to look at the whole chapter verse by verse here in Daniel chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. It's obvious that the vision from the previous chapter, chapter 2, had gone to the king's head a bit. Daniel had revealed to him in chapter 2, verse 38, that the image of the king's dream, that he, Nebuchadnezzar, was the head of gold. And the king apparently wasn't satisfied with just being the head. He was making a statement here by making this 90-foot high and 9 feet wide statue. That was a pretty impressive statue. It says in verse 2, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. This is quite a list of dignitaries. The word satrap was a prince, and the rest of the positions that are listed are pretty self-explanatory. But needless to say, as you go through the list, anybody who was anybody in the kingdom was there. They had no choice but to be there. They were pretty much ordered to be there for the dedication of this statue. Everyone of importance, again, was ordered or commanded to be present for the dedication. Verse 4, then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Here we have a pretty straightforward command given by the king. The band is going to play this massive orchestra with all these different kinds of instruments listed. And when the band plays, when you hear the music, you're going to bow down. And just to demonstrate that the king means business, there is a consequence for those who refuse. Look at verse 6. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. I mean, that sounds pretty simple. You either bow down and you worship the image, or you'll be burned alive. And for most people, that's a no-brainer. Well, what are you going to do? Well, if my choices are either be burned alive or bow down and worship this statue, most people wouldn't even hesitate. Regardless of what they thought or felt in their heart, they would just bow down automatically to save their life. It says in verse 7, so at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. We see the people's reaction here. The king said, bow or else, and so we're going to bow. That's their simple conclusion. And again, that's what most people would do probably in this situation. This was the easiest thing to do, but God doesn't always ask us to do what is easiest or even the most convenient. As believers, we're called to do what's right and to take a stand. And as I said at the beginning, I think that's part of the purpose of this passage, is so we can do a little self-examination and ask how strong is our commitment and our stand for the Lord. Verse 8 says, "Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image." Well, of course, that is what the king had done. It's interesting what we would call repetition in this passage. I think it's just showing us the detail and the seriousness of the king's command so that you understand exactly what we're talking about here. Instead of just saying, okay, now the music's going to play. No, it tells us every single instrument, every single time, so that the people understood this is what the command is. And when it says in verse 8, certain Chaldeans came forward to accuse the Jews, they are going to point out the fact that you told everybody to bow down, king, when all the music plays. And in verse 11, "And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." I mean, they're just sort of going over what the king had commanded. Verse 12, "There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon." And probably some of the problem here with these certain Chaldeans is they were jealous because they had been elevated up the ranks in terms of authority. It says that they were set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. We were first introduced to these young men in Daniel chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, which says, "Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego." And it's believed that these young men were about 16 by many Bible scholars at that time that they were brought to Babylon. And it's interesting to look at these names and the names that they had and the names they were given. Daniel means God is my judge. His new name, Belteshazzar, means lady protect the king, and that lady refers to the wife of Marduk, who was one of their false gods. Hananiah means whom Jehovah has favored, or Jehovah has been gracious. His new name, Shadrach, means I am very fearful of God, and that refers probably to the sun god. The name inspired or illuminated by the sun god. Mishael means who is as God, or literally who is comparable to God, and his new name, Meshach, means I am of little account. Azariah means whom Jehovah helps, or Jehovah has helped, and his new name, Abednego, means servant of the Shining One, named after their god, Nebu. So instead of names identified with and dedicated to the one true God, they were given names dedicated to their four leading false gods. And the whole idea, I believe, was by identifying them with these pagan gods, that would help them to forget their God, or so they thought. I mean, after all, from the Babylonians' perspective, their God had abandoned them or failed them. And so they gave them these new names. Verse 13 says, Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up?" You know, one note here that some people ask when looking at this account is, where was Daniel? Did he have a moment of weakness, or did he bow down like everybody else? And I believe that the best solution is that Daniel was not there, because certainly Daniel would have not bowed down either, as we see in chapter 6, and I did another video on that passage, where Daniel's in the lion's den for praying, or thrown in the lion's den for praying. And so I think the best answer to the question, where was Daniel, here in this chapter, is he wasn't there at that time. In Daniel chapter 2 and verse 48, we see that Daniel had been promoted to a very high position by the king, and he was no doubt away on business as the events unfold here in chapter 3. Verse 15, "Now if you are ready," this is King Nebuchadnezzar talking to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, says, now if you're ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? I mean, this seems really nice of the king. It's almost like he's giving them a second chance. I mean, not really, but that's what it sounds like. The king is just making sure that they understand that he's in charge. And because of their positions, probably of authority that the king had given them, he's giving them what appears to be a second chance. But again, he makes it very clear, if you don't bow down, you're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And this is extraordinary, their response in verse 16 and following. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Literally, we don't have to think about this. We don't need time. We've already determined in our heart what our answer is. And it says in verse 17, if that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So they make it clear, we don't need time to think about this. We've already determined in our heart that we're not going to bow down. Our God that we serve can save us. I mean, he can, they believe that, but he is going to save us from you, meaning what? I think that indicates that they believe they were going to die in this fire, because after they died in the fire, there was nothing else the king could do to them. And so that's why they say that he is going to save us from you, O king. He's going to save us from your hand. And verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. You know, I've always wondered, as I've heard this story, even as a little kid, I remember thinking this, what good would turning the temperature up, heat the fire 7 times hotter than normal? All it would do would actually, they would die quicker, because as we see, the men here in a second who threw them in, they died just from throwing them in. And so by heating the fire up 7 times hotter, because the king is so angry and so furious, again, if they were to die in the fire, they would just die quicker. Verse 21, then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the fire exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Just imagine, just from being that close to the fire to throw them in, these strong men of valor that were given the task to throw them in, they died instantly just from throwing them into the fiery furnace. Again, because of the king's anger and because he had them turn the heat up 7 times hotter. It says, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. There's always been debate as to the identity of this 4th individual, but I believe that it is what we call theophany, and that's a pre-incarnate appearance of the Lord Jesus Christ before he came to this earth in the form of a child and took upon himself human flesh. It says in verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. It's amazing. The fire had no effect on them whatsoever because God did not allow it to have any effect. And interesting footnote, the only thing that did burn was the ropes that they had been bound with. We're told that even their clothes didn't smell like smoke. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, and interesting to hear his change of tune here. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God." You know, when we really think about it, what other conclusion would you expect the king to come to? What he had just witnessed was a miracle that none of his gods, who were false gods, could have done because they weren't real. Like one of my professors said years ago, their gods had a real problem. They weren't real, and they couldn't help in any way, shape, or form. Verse 29, therefore, this is the king talking, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. You know, this is very similar to the statement that the king had made in Daniel chapter 2. He said, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." You know why, as the king made this decree, that no other God can save in this way? Because there is no other God. Now, I know not everybody watching this is going to believe that, but I believe that with all my heart, and this is a magnificent example of the power of God. Verse 30 says, "Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon." This promotion, I think, could possibly explain why Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't in the account in Daniel chapter 6, where in that case, a different king made a decree that you couldn't pray for 30 days to anybody except for him, and that was Darius or Darius. And of course, they weren't there either. Some people have asked, why weren't they, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the account in chapter 6, just like where was Daniel here in chapter 3? And I think the answer in both cases, in chapter 3 and also chapter 6, I think that the others weren't there, which is why they didn't take a stand as well, because I'm sure that they would have. You know, God has called us to take a stand, and more than ever in this world that we live in today, we need to be sure that we are taking a stand for Him. Well, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I very much appreciate it. I also want to invite you to visit the channel and watch some of the other videos. I'm going to put a link to the video that I did on Daniel chapter 6, the account of Daniel in the lion's den, and invite you to watch that. Please like this video, give it a thumbs up. Also share it with someone that might be encouraged and blessed by it, and subscribe to the channel. All of those things are very helpful to the channel and much appreciated. So again, thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. This is Pastor Dave. You have a blessed day.